It was 2:17 in the morning when the phone rang. The deal, a billion-dollar merger that had taken 18 months to negotiate, was hemorrhaging in the digital dark. And the only person in the entire 40-story headquarters to hear the CEO's panic was the man who'd been hired 3 weeks earlier to fetch the coffee. His name was Michael Vance, a 36-year-old single father, 3 weeks into a job as a temp filing clerk at Sterling Capital. To the executives on the 50th floor, he was invisible, but the man now staring at a screen full of crumbling numbers in the silent, empty office had a past the company had never bothered to check, a past that held the only key to saving them. This is how a billion-dollar disaster collided with the one person who couldn't possibly fix it, and did. 5 years earlier, Michael Vance had a different life. He was a lead structuring analyst at Meridian Bank in London, the kind of young gun who built complex financial instruments for mergers worth 10 times the GDP of small nations. He spoke the language of leveraged buyouts and debt covenants as a native tongue, but that life ended with a single phone call on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. His wife, Elena, had been in a car accident. By the time Michael made it from Canary Wharf to the hospital in Hampstead, she was gone. Their daughter, Sophie, was 2 years old. Grief doesn't just break your heart, it can break your career. The high-stakes 100-hour weeks became impossible. The cold precision the job required felt obscene. He left London and brought Sophie back to the States, to a small apartment in the city where Sterling Capital's glass tower stood, to be near his sister for support. He took the temp job at Sterling precisely because it demanded nothing of the part of him that was still shattered. He filed papers. He fetched coffee. He was a ghost in the machine, and that was the point. The Aquilon merger was Sterling's moonshot. For 18 months, CEO Sarah Chen and her team had negotiated to absorb their largest competitor, a move that would create a financial services titan worth over $120 billion. The deal was set to be announced at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. At 7 p.m. the night before, Sarah Chen was still in her office on the 50th floor, reviewing the final numbers one last time. That's when she saw it. A junior analyst's catastrophic error, buried in a subsidiary's debt schedule on page 217 of the due diligence report. A misplaced decimal point that turned a manageable $400 million liability into a $4 billion one. The error violated a key covenant in their own financing agreement. If they signed the deal as structured, Sterling would be in technical default by lunchtime. The news would crater their stock, void their financing, and sink the company. Panic is a quiet thing at that altitude. Sarah Chen assembled her exhausted core team in the war room. For 6 hours, they tried to rework the numbers. Every path led to a dead end. By 1 a.m., the lead investment banker from Wall Street had thrown his pen across the table and said the words no CEO ever wants to hear: "There's no fix. You have to walk away." The team dispersed, defeated. Sarah was alone, staring at the abyss of a very public, very humiliating, very billion-dollar failure. She had one desperate, illogical thought. The security log showed one employee badge still active in the building, a temp in the records department on the 20th floor. She didn't even know his name. She called the main line for that floor, not expecting an answer. Michael Vance picked up on the first ring. He was there because the temp agency offered double pay for overnight filing to prepare for the merger announcement. Sophie was at his sister's for a sleepover. The phone's ring cut through the silent, fluorescent-lit cubicle farm. "Sterling Capital, Records Department," he said, his voice calm, tired. "Who is this?" Sarah Chen's voice was strained, sharp with adrenaline. "Michael Vance, I'm the night filing temp. I need you to come to the 50th floor, the executive conference room, now." There was a pause. Michael knew who she was. Everyone knew Sarah Chen's voice from the company-wide addresses. "Ma'am, I'm not authorized for the executive floor. My clearance." "I am overriding your clearance. Get up here, now." The elevator ride took 38 seconds. Michael stepped into a realm of polished wood, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights, and a sprawling conference table buried under a blizzard of financial models and legal documents. Sarah Chen stood at the head, her auburn hair disheveled, her blazer long discarded. She looked at the man in the basic office shirt, sleeves rolled up, and saw exactly what she expected to see: a clerk. She pointed to a screen displaying a labyrinthine spreadsheet. This deal is collapsing because of this. She tapped the screen at the erroneous line. We have 7 hours until the announcement. Explain to me, in simple terms, what happens if we sign. Michael Vance moved closer. He didn't look at her. He looked at the numbers. And the strangest thing happened. The fog of grief and the numbness of the past 5 years parted just for a moment. The language came back. It was like muscle memory. He leaned in, his eyes tracking the figures. His voice was different when he spoke, not the hesitant tone of a temp, but flat, analytical, sure. You're looking at it wrong. This isn't a liability covenant breach. It's an asset classification error. The subsidiary's debt is held in a tranche that, under Section C of the International Accounting Standards update from last year, can be redesignated as a contingent obligation if the parent company provides a cross-guarantee from a separate, clean entity. Sarah Chen stared at him. What did you just say? Michael turned from the screen and walked to the massive whiteboard on the wall. He picked up a marker. You have a non-operating shell company. Here, he drew a box. It's empty. You use it to hold the intellectual property from the old Cambridge acquisition. You transfer the problematic debt into this shell, then have your Singapore subsidiary, which has a AAA credit rating from a different agency, guarantee it. The debt doesn't vanish, but it moves off the critical covenant calculation. It becomes a footnote, not a deal-breaker. He began drawing lines, arrows, a flowchart of entities and obligations. His hand moved with a speed and certainty that was utterly alien to the man who had brought her coffee 3 days prior. He spoke of debt-to-equity swaps, jurisdictional arbitrage, and regulatory loopholes. He was rebuilding the entire billion-dollar architecture from the ground up on a whiteboard. Sarah Chen sank slowly into a chair, her eyes wide, following the dance of the marker. The sheer, impossible scale of the expertise on display emanating from this man in a cheap shirt short-circuited her understanding. Her mouth went dry. The question formed, born of pure, unadulterated shock. She whispered it. How do you know this? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and absolute. For a long second, Michael Vance was no longer in the conference room. He was back in a London trading pit, the air electric with stress and possibility. Then he blinked. He looked at his hands, at the marker stains, then at the CEO's stunned face. I used to do this, he said, his voice quiet, the professional cadence fading back into something softer, weary. At Meridian Bank, I structured these kinds of deals for 5 years. Sarah Chen's mind raced, connecting impossible dots. The temp, the filing clerk, the London banking wizard. Why are you here? She asked, the question more baffled than accusatory. Life, he said, a one-word explanation that contained a universe of grief. He set the marker down. The plan on the board will work, but you have about 5 hours to execute it. You need to get your legal team in Singapore on the phone. Now. Sarah didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and called her chief legal officer, waking him up. Get to the office, bring the entire M and a team, and get our Singapore General Counsel on a video link. Now. She then called the head of the investment banking team, the one who had declared the deal dead. Get back here. There's a path forward. Within 45 minutes, the war room was repopulated with rumpled, confused executives. They stared at the whiteboard, then at Michael Vance, who Sarah had simply introduced as our restructuring consultant. The lead banker, David Forrester, was openly skeptical. This is a temp, he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Sarah, this is insanity. We're going to take regulatory and legal guidance from a guy who normally files Form 10KS. Sarah Chen stood at the head of the table, a newfound steel in her posture. He identified a viable path in 10 minutes after you told me there was none. Right now, I don't care about his job title. I care about his solution. David, your team will run the new numbers. Now. For the next 3 hours, Michael Vance was the quiet epicenter of the room. He did not command. He answered. When the Singapore lawyer questioned the legality of the cross-guarantee, Michael cited the specific clause in the Jurisdictions Companies Act. When the tax advisor worried about implications, Michael outlined the offsetting credit. He spoke in clear, precise terms, translating complex financial jargon into actionable steps. The team, fueled by adrenaline and a sliver of hope, worked at a frenzied pace. But the personal stakes were escalating in the quiet corners of the room. Sarah Chen pulled Michael aside during a coffee run. "The board," she said quietly. "I have to call the chairman in 30 minutes to either recommend we proceed or pull the plug. If we go forward on your plan and it fails, the company is finished. And so am I. Why should I bet everything on you?" Michael met her gaze. "Because you don't have a better option, and because I'm not betting your company, I'm betting my daughter's future. I need this temp job. If this fails, I lose it. She doesn't get that stability. That's my stake." It was a confession of vulnerability that was more convincing than any bravado. Sarah nodded. A silent pact formed in the fluorescent glow of the pantry. At 4 a.m., a new crisis erupted. David Forrester's junior analyst ran in, face pale. "We have a leak. A reporter from the Financial Chronicle just emailed our press office asking for comment on last-minute covenant issues threatening the Aquilon merger." The room froze. If the market got a whiff of this, Sterling's stock would plummet in pre-market trading, scuttling the deal's valuation instantly. Panic, this time, was not quiet. Sarah Chen closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temples. Then she looked at Michael. "The shell company transfer, how quickly can it be legally executed?" "With all parties on standby and digital signatures, minutes," Michael said. "But the guarantee from the Singapore subsidiary requires 2 board signatories. One is in Singapore, the other is on a hiking trip in the Swiss Alps. We need him to e-sign." "Get him," Sarah ordered her chief of staff. "Find a satellite phone. Get him to a mountain hut with Wi-Fi. I don't care if you have to hire a helicopter." The race was now on 2 fronts: finalize the structure and contain the leak. Sarah made a calculated decision. She called the reporter back directly. She did not deny. She said, "We are in the final stages of a routine structural optimization, which is common in transactions of this scale. We have no further comment until the announcement at 9. It was a bluff of monumental proportions. At 5:30 a.m., with the sky still dark, the final piece of the puzzle was in place. The numbers were recrunched, the legal documents were drafted, and the lone board member in the Alps had signed from a cafe in Grindelwald, the mountain peaks visible on his video feed. The deal could proceed. Sarah Chen stood before her exhausted team. "We go ahead, we announce at 9. But as the first hints of dawn colored the skyline, Michael Vance was cleaning the whiteboard, his part apparently done. David Forrester approached him, his earlier hostility replaced by a wary, professional respect. "That was impressive work. You saved our necks. We'll make sure you get a bonus. A nice one." Michael just nodded. He was thinking of picking up Sophie, of the normalcy of his real life. He didn't see the look in David Forrester's eyes, a look of calculation, of a man who had just seen a monumental threat to his own prestige and value. At 6 a.m., as Michael gathered his things to leave, Sarah Chen stopped him at the elevator bank. "You're not going back to the records department," she said. "Effective now, you're a special advisor to the CEO. I want you on the announcement call. I want you in the room when we sign." "I have to get my daughter," Michael said, the simplest of all truths. "Bring her," Sarah said. "Have her brought to the office. She can wait in my private suite. You are not leaving this building until this is over." It was not a request. It was an order born of absolute dependence. Michael Vance was now the linchpin, and Sarah Chen would not let him out of her sight. As the elevator doors closed, taking Michael down to the security desk to arrange for his sister to bring Sophie, Sarah returned to her office. She looked at the press release ready to be sent to the world in 3 hours. She then looked at a secure internal email that had just arrived from the head of corporate security. The subject line, "Background check discrepancy, Michael Vance." She opened it, and the ground, so recently stabilized, shifted once more. The email did not list a 5-year stint at Meridian Bank. It listed a 7-year stint, ending not with a resignation, but with a termination. The reason for termination was a single, alarming word: investigation. Sarah Chen stared at the word on her screen, investigation. In the high-stakes world of finance, it was a word that could mean anything from a minor compliance review to criminal fraud. She looked at the clock. 6:20 a.m., the announcement was in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The man she had just entrusted with the company's future had a red flag in his past he hadn't mentioned. She walked back to the conference room where Michael was now sitting alone, looking out at the waking city. She closed the door softly. "Meridian Bank," she said, "you were terminated. Why?" Michael didn't turn from the window. He'd been expecting this. "I said I left because my wife died. That's true, but the official reason was different." "An investigation," Sarah said, her voice flat. He finally looked at her. "I was the one investigating." The statement hung there, rearranging the facts. Sarah sat down across from him. "Explain." "For the last year I was at Meridian, I was on a team auditing some of the bank's own complex debt products, things they'd sold to pensions, to municipalities. We found discrepancies, practices that were at best aggressively creative, at worst fraudulent. I raised concerns loudly. It didn't make me popular. When I requested personal leave after Alina died, they used it as an opportunity. They terminated me, citing conduct during the internal review as the reason. It was a way to silence me and discredit anything I'd found. My severance was conditional on my silence." Sarah processed this. A whistleblower, not a fraudster. It changed everything, and yet it changed nothing about the current danger. If this gets out today, during the announcement, the narrative won't be whistleblower. It will be Sterling Savior was fired for misconduct. David Forrester would leak that to the Wall Street Journal before the ink is dry on the merger. "I know," Michael said. At that moment, the door opened. Sarah's assistant ushered in a small, sleepy girl with dark hair, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Sophie. Behind her was Michael's sister, Jess, who gave Michael a worried look. "She wanted to see you," Jess said. The professional and the personal collided in the sterile conference room. Michael knelt and hugged his daughter. "Hey, Bug, you're up early." "Aunt Jess said you saved a company," Sophie mumbled into his shoulder. Michael shot a look at Jess, who shrugged. "It's all over the internal chat. The night temp who fixed the big deal. It's a very small town in here once the sun comes up." That was the other problem. The story was already spreading inside Sterling. The myth of the miracle temp. A myth that would shatter if the wrong part of his past came to light. Sarah made a decision. She smiled at Sophie. "Hi, Sophie, I'm Sarah. Your dad has been amazing. Would you like to see where you can watch cartoons and have some breakfast?" She led Sophie and Jess to her private executive suite down the hall, a spacious room with a sofa and a large television. When she returned, her face was all business. "We have 2 hours. The board call is in 30 minutes. I need to tell them we are proceeding. I will not mention your past, but you need to understand, David Forrester is already suspicious. He will have his people digging. If he finds what I just found, he will use it. He sees you as a threat to his authority, and he's right." As if summoned, David entered the room holding a tablet. "Sarah, a word, in private." They stepped into the hall. David didn't waste time. "I had my assistant do a quick dig, your consultant. His last listed job before temping was at Meridian Bank. His title is listed as senior analyst, but the employment end code is T for termination. There's no detail, but that's a huge red flag. We cannot have this man anywhere near this deal. The risk is astronomical." Sarah kept her voice cool. "I am aware of his employment history, David. The circumstances of his departure are personal and not relevant to the transaction. His work tonight stands on its own." "The board will not see it that way when it blows up in our faces," David hissed. "You're jeopardizing everything based on a feeling. I'm demanding we delay the announcement and run a full background check." "You can demand all you like," Sarah said, her tone icy. "The decision is made. We proceed. And you will not mention this on the board call, or I will personally hold you responsible for sabotaging this merger." It was a declaration of war. David's eyes narrowed. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that the battle lines were drawn. He walked away, already pulling out his personal phone. The board call at 7 a.m. was tense but anticlimactic. Sarah, with Michael silently listening in on a headset, walked the directors through the restructured deal. She presented it as the work of a collaborative all-night effort by the team. She did not mention Michael Vance by name. The board, relieved to have a solution, voted unanimously to proceed. At 8 a.m., the press release was finalized. At 8:30, Sarah and her top executives moved to the broadcast studio on the 49th floor to prepare for the live announcement to the markets. Michael was asked to remain in the conference room. He was, officially, now a ghost again. He watched the financial news channels on the large screen. Pre-market trading showed Sterling's stock ticking up slightly on anticipation. Everything was proceeding. He felt a strange emptiness. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by a deep fatigue. He thought about taking Sophie home, about returning to his quiet life. Then at 8:45, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It contained a link to a draft article on a financial gossip blog not yet published. The headline read, "Sterling's Miracle Man, SAVIOR or Secret Liability." The article detailed his termination from Meridian, hinting darkly at undisclosed irregularities and questioning Sterling's due diligence. The source was listed as a senior deal insider. David Forrester, it had to be. The leak wasn't about the Covenant error anymore. It was about him. Michael showed the message to Sarah just as a producer was clipping a microphone to her suit jacket. Her face went pale. If this publishes, even as rumor, it creates uncertainty. The stock could wobble. Aquilin's board gets nervous. She looked at the clock, 8:50. "We have 10 minutes. I can't stop this." Michael stared at the ticking clock, then at the draft article. He thought about the investigation at Meridian, about the intricate, hidden flaws he'd found in their products. Flaws designed to be overlooked, and he had a terrible, brilliant idea. "He's attacking my past to create doubt," Michael said, "so we give the past a different context, one he can't argue with." "What are you talking about?" "Get me 1 minute of airtime," Michael said. "During your announcement, you introduced me not as a temp, but as the former Meridian analyst who uncovered the Cambridge debenture flaws, the one who forced the industry-wide reforms last year. The story never made the news because Meridian settled quietly, but every person in that audience will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the reason the international accounting standards were updated. The same update I used to fix your deal tonight." Sarah Chen's mind raced. It was a nuclear option. It would expose Michael completely, but it would transform him from a liability into a legendary asset. It would make David Forrester's leak look like jealous slander, and it would irrevocably bind Michael Vance to Sterling Capital. "You'll have to go on camera," she said. "You'll have to own it." Michael looked toward her executive suite, where his daughter was eating cereal. He nodded. "I know." At 8:59, the broadcast director counted down. Sarah Chen stood at the podium, the Sterling and Aquilin logos glowing on the screen behind her. In the wings, Michael Vance straightened the same cheap office shirt he'd worn all night. He could see his daughter, Sophie, sitting on the floor of the control room with Jess, her eyes wide at the monitors. The red light on the camera glowed. Sarah began. Her voice was calm, powerful, projecting total control. She announced the successful completion of the merger, painting it as a strategic triumph. Then she paused. She looked directly into the lens. "This transaction was complex, and last night, our team faced an unprecedented structural challenge. The person who engineered the solution is with me today. Many of you in the financial community will know his name, though you haven't heard it in some time." She turned. "Michael Vance." Michael walked onto the lit platform, the glare of the cameras hot on his skin. Sarah continued. "Before joining Sterling, Michael was the lead analyst at Meridian Bank, whose internal investigation exposed the flawed accounting behind the Cambridge debentures. His work forced critical industry-wide reforms, including the very regulatory updates that made today's deal possible. We are fortunate to have his expertise." It was a masterstroke. In 30 seconds, she reframed his entire narrative. Michael stepped to the microphone, his heart pounding. He didn't talk about the night's work. He spoke to the room of analysts, traders, and rivals watching. The Cambridge situation proved that complexity shouldn't obscure truth. Last night was about applying that same principle, clarity over confusion. This merger is sound. Its structure is now more transparent and resilient because of the challenge we solved. He spoke for 90 seconds. When he finished, the control room was silent for a beat, then erupted. On the financial news channels, the chyrons changed instantly. From Sterling Aquilin merger finalized to Sterling's secret weapon, Cambridge whistleblower emerges. The pre-market stock ticker, which had been steady, jumped 3%. David Forrester watched from the back of the studio, his face a mask of cold fury. His leaked gossip blog item was now useless, instantly drowned out by a much bigger, officially sanctioned story. He had not just lost, he had been outmaneuvered in public. The official signing ceremony took place at 10 a.m. in the boardroom. Michael was asked to stand beside Sarah Chen. He declined, choosing instead to sit with Sophie in the back, letting the executives take the photos with the pens. As the documents were signed, Sarah caught his eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The aftermath was a whirlwind. By noon, Michael's phone was buzzing with messages from headhunters and old London contacts. By 3 p.m., a formal job offer from Sarah Chen was on the table, Vice President of Strategic Financial Solutions, reporting directly to the CEO, with a salary that made his temp pay look like a rounding error. But the personal aftermath was quieter and more profound. That evening, Michael put Sophie to bed in their small apartment. As he read her a story, she looked up at him. "Daddy, are you a hero now?" He brushed her hair from her forehead. "No, Bug, I'm just a dad who's really good at his job, and I finally remember what that job is." The following Monday, Michael Vance walked into Sterling Capital, not through the service entrance, but through the main lobby. His new security badge gave him access to the executive floors. His first meeting was with Sarah Chen. She handed him a file. "Your first project. It's a mess. A $500 million private equity investment that's turning sour. I need you to unwind it without sparking a lawsuit." He took the file. "I'll need a team." "You have one. I've reassigned 3 analysts from David Forrester's group." He wasn't pleased. Michael almost smiled. "I bet." As he settled into his new office, a surprise arrived. A hand-delivered envelope from Meridian Bank's general counsel. Inside was a formal letter, stating that after a review of the circumstances surrounding his termination, the bank was reclassifying his departure as a mutual agreement and offering a substantial, undisclosed settlement to finally resolve all matters related to his internal investigation. The whistleblower had been vindicated, his reputation professionally restored. But the final, most personal surprise came a week later. Sarah Chen asked him to stay late. When he entered her office, she had 2 glasses of wine poured. "This isn't about work," she said. "I had our archivist pull something." She slid an old, bound report across the desk. It was from 15 years earlier, a summer internship program at Goldman Sachs. On the list of interns was Sarah Chen, and 2 names below hers, Michael Vance. Michael stared at it. "I don't remember that." "You wouldn't," Sarah said. "You were there for 2 weeks before you transferred to a different department. We were kids. But when I saw your name on the temp roster 3 weeks ago, it bothered me. I knew I'd seen it somewhere before. I thought it was just deja vu. But last night, I had her dig this up." She tapped the page. "We were in the same room for a brief moment at the very start of our careers, before any of this. Before London, before Sterling, before any of the grief or the glory." Michael looked from the faded paper to her face. The coincidence was staggering, a hidden thread connecting their paths long before the crisis forced them to intersect. "Why tell me now?" he asked. "Because context matters," Sarah said. "I bet on you because you were brilliant, but part of me maybe bet on you because some deep down part recognized a name from a time when everything was still possible. It's a reminder that we are all just building on old, forgotten foundations." Michael Vance left the office that night not with a sense of an ending, but of a strange, circular beginning. He had a career again, he had stability for his daughter, and he had, in Sarah Chen, not just a boss, but an ally who understood the full map of his journey, from a forgotten intern to the man who saved her company. The story of the 2 a.m. miracle became Wall Street legend, but the real story was quieter. It was the sound of a father reading to his daughter in an apartment that was no longer shadowed by fear. It was the solid weight of a security badge in his pocket. It was the knowledge that the past could be reconfigured, not erased, and that sometimes the most stable structure is built on the foundation of everything you thought you'd lost. So what do we call a story like this? A comeback? A fluke? A hidden genius narrative? Perhaps it's simpler. It's a story about the quiet people in the room you never notice and the vast reservoirs of skill and experience they carry, untapped, until the moment the system breaks and calls out for the one person who truly knows how to fix it. Michael Vance didn't change who he was that night. The world simply changed its ability to see him. We build our institutions on hierarchies and titles, on assumptions about where competence must reside. We promote the loudest voices and the most polished resumes. And in doing so, we risk building entire structures that are one decimal point away from collapse, with no one in the room who remembers the old, solid ways of building things. The most dangerous blind spot in any organization isn't a lack of data. It's the inability to recognize that the person who seems irrelevant might be the most relevant person of all. Michael's story forces a question: how many other people are out there right now, their true capabilities masked by circumstance, by grief, by a career detour, by a title that doesn't fit? How much collective genius is sitting in the cubicles we ignore, driving the cars that deliver our packages, answering our customer service calls? We'll never know until a crisis forces us to look. And by then, it might be too late. The true resolution of this story isn't the merger, or the job, or the vindication. It's the restoration of a fundamental truth, that a person is not defined by the worst moment of their past, nor by the lowest title on their resume. We are the sum of all our seasons, the triumphs, the losses, the quiet years of survival, and the sudden, fierce moments of revival. Potential isn't something that fades, it waits. It sits in the dark, like a forgotten blueprint, until the lights go out and someone, desperate, finally asks for the person who can read it in the dark. If there's a lesson in the silent, early morning hum of that office, it's this: look twice at the people you overlook. Listen for the quiet confidence beneath the hesitant answer. The next time you face an impossible problem, the solution might not be in the boardroom. It might be in the chair you never thought to pull up to the table. Thanks for watching. If you found this story of hidden potential and unexpected redemption compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that change everything. We'll see you in the next one.